Learned colleagues, welcome back to the peer review meeting of Mr. Riley's paper. I apologize for the delay. Unfortunately, Mr. Riley decided that he wanted to have a private tutorial with me a few days ago, and it was going well until I offered him a drink from my drinks globe. He went bananas. Trashed the place. Scared the life out of Barbara. She leapt straight through the window and got tangled in the wisteria. She was hysterical. Of course, I couldn't get her down, because it's on the third floor, you see. Yes, so she's still there. I cut the stems at the bottom so the wisteria will eventually die and she will be gently deposited on the lawn below the window. But for the time being, I am without an assistant, which has meant I had to find my own way to the off-license. But I did find my own way to the off-license. So let's carry on. We have reached page 18. In our previous episode, we were discussing a pertinent question. I don't really care what that question was, so I'm just going to carry on with page 18. It doesn't... The previous pages apparently have no relation to the following pages. Right, I'll go very quick. Wet the old whistle. Ooh. Right. God. This is what my life has come to. I'm starting to think that universal credit might be a sensible option. Or early retirement. That would be something worth considering. Okay, so this poor demented chap has just disclosed that he thinks the judiciary is better at deciding science than scientists. So let's carry on. At this point, it can go one of two ways. To demonstrate opposing views, it could be itemized, brackets, like particulars of claims, perhaps, close brackets, for example, the geocentric position, or perhaps we could argue the views of the electric universe supporters. Simply to raise some of the valid contentious points of the Copernican model, it will be demonstrated that there are some areas that raise more doubt than might be appreciated at this point in the article. The Copernican solar system has to be right. Right? What? Has to be right. Right? This is a legal paper. Oh... I'm so fed up of reading this. I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea in the first place. Who let him into this fucking school? I do apologize. I've tried my best not to swear for what amounts to probably 2.5 hours of reading this absolute drivel, but I'm at the end of my tether. What are the issues for anybody to even question it? Exactly, good question. Before we address some of the problems of the Copernican teaching, according to the recent poll, teachers are considered one of the most trusted professions in the UK, whereas politicians are one of the least trusted. That's important for some reason. Let us suppose that a politician was able to control the narrative of what the children of today are taught about the world in which they live, but in a... Christ, it's another run-on sentence. Let us suppose that a politician was able to control the narrative of what the children of today are taught about the world in which they live, but then an otherwise trustworthy profession, brackets teachers, close brackets, are then spreading the indoctrination because they themselves have to pass the exams where 93 million miles sun was the correct answer. This then makes the possibility of indoctrination not only possible but probable. Jesus Christ. So in light of the above, let's put in my own annotation here, in light of the above nonsense, let us now consider some of the issues of Copernican issue. Let us now consider some of the issues of Copernican issue. So in light of the above, let us now consider some of the issues of Copernican issues. If these issues are allowed to be ignored by the national curriculum, then otherwise trustworthy teachers can mislead children with regards to the teachings of the Copernican model. The problem with drinking as much scotch as I have in order to get over the shock of watching poor Barbara dangling upside down from the wisteria, her skirts flapping in the breeze, and she's going through a bit of a hippie phase at the moment. So it's like watching a hedgehog stuck on a fence. Poor Barbara. Is that I can see two papers in front of me, but I know there's only one. Okay. Firstly, the teaching of the Copernican model is a reification fallacy in that it treats a model as real world, and in doing so, you are actually being taught that you live in a system or concept. It is a model. It is not real world. To fail to realize this as reification fallacy means you are already victim to a pseudoscience. Of course, it's not a reification fallacy, is it? Because it's a model that represents what's actually there. It would be a reification fallacy if you were to come up with some sort of, dinner plate with continents in the middle and a big ice wall around the edge and said that was real and then attempted to find things that, suit it. If you develop a hypothetical, completely non-existing thing and decide that that thing is real, that would be the sort of fallacy he's talking about. Twat. Science is generally defined to be the observation and systematic experimentation of the natural world. Sounds easy initially, but when you see some of the touted science, it becomes obvious to the intellectual. You're not describing yourself. It becomes obvious to the intellectual that there is a real issue with what is being taught as science. ... Actually being science. It should be 3 dots. You haven't put enough dots. Actually being science, open brackets, rather than pseudoscience, close brackets, full stop. In contrast, pseudoscience can be defined as, quotation marks, the belief or practice mistakenly regarded as based on scientific method, close quotation marks, full stop. For the purposes of this paper, unless the claimed science is based on scientific method, not the scientific method, but some aforementioned unknown scientific method apparently, it has to be treated as pseudoscience and devoid of the status of science. This is the standard that a court should really apply. Science should not be taught unless it is actually science. I agree. Completely. Which is why I think I'm going to fail this paper. Ha ha ha. More scotch. There must be a difference between science, pseudoscience, and pseudoscience that sounds more credible than it actually is. Theoretical what? There must be a difference between science, pseudoscience, and pseudoscience that sounds more credible than it actually is. Theoretical science. Right. There must be teachings to children of how to contrast real science from fake science. Otherwise, they will happily believe anything they are taught in school because of the fiduciary relationship that exists between teacher and student. Why would my teacher not tell me the truth? Question mark. No quotation marks there. I don't know who is saying that final statement. Presumably Anthony. Using pseudoscience, a chart or diagram or a graph or a model is not the physical or natural world, obviously. It is a model, and that fact falls outside quotation marks science, close quotation marks, and in doing so cannot be taught as science. It should be contrasted with science because there is nothing physical or natural about seismology predictions about the core of the Earth. For example, I see, that's the end. It is technology being touted as science, but in fact it is not science at all. It is the use of technology mistaken as science. What the hell is he talking about? If you use technology, it's not science? Is this man insane? Oh, there's a quote here. I don't know who it's by. It's not annotated. Here's the quote. One of the mistakes many people making thinking about science is to confuse it with technology. As a result, science often either receives undue credit, brackets, for the quotation marks, miracles of modern science, end quotation marks, in one's kitchen, close brackets, or undue blame, open brackets, for everything from overly firm tomatoes to nuclear war, close brackets. In fact, science doesn't make things. Scientists developed the understanding of radiation sufficient for the invention of the microwave oven, but neither making a microwave nor using it are science. All in capitals. Scientists are in the business of generating knowledge, whereas engineers are in the business of generating technology. ... In short, science often leads to technology, and it often uses technology, but it isn't technology, and in fact it can operate quite independently of technology. Super. So what does that make a satellite? Science or technology? Or both? Or neither? Or fictional, I suppose, Anthony would say. Scotch. Oh. I'm on the second bottle while making these. As stated earlier in this paper, there is no scientific evidence to prove gravity. However, it is actually defined. The distance to the sun is questioned on the basis of verifying the evidence to be true and also appreciating that the maths works out two ways. Comma. A distant sun on a curved surface and a close sun on a plane. Just like the rain in Spain. Carl Sagan was wrong to assert there was only one interpretation, because obviously he knows more. Another issue is that the Earth has a gas pressure which can be measured at 14.7 psi at the coast. I think it means at sea level, because you can stand on the coast on a cliff and it would be lower, but let's not quibble over facts. There is an issue with this. Yes, there is. If you place a small helium balloon in a vacuum chamber and then remove the air, you will see the helium balloon will expand in size until it pops. This is because the internal pressure of the balloon is pushing out against the balloon and the atmospheric 14.7 psi is pushing back, stopping the balloon from bursting. If you remove the pressure pushing back and the balloon bursts, then the balloon is destroyed. A simple concept to visualize without any science needed. I would argue with that statement. However, in science, the definition of gas pressure states that the pressure comes from the walls of its container. Think about this for a moment. The helium balloon is the container, and by removing the surrounding air that it is in, the pressure inside the balloon is pushing out against the balloon. It makes perfect sense in the context of a balloon, but now let us consider the Earth in the context of space. How exactly, this is in italics, it must be important. How exactly can we have a gas pressure without a balloon to hold the pressure in again? We are taught that we not only have a vacuum up there in space, but we are told we exist in a state of gas pressure. But there is no balloon to contain the pressure. We have already discussed that science cannot prove gravity, so if gravity is the reason why the gas pressure exists, brackets, to negate the need for a balloon, close brackets, then this would have to be demonstrated in science to prove that it is actually true, but we have already seen that the Cavendish experiment, brackets, this is not an experiment, close brackets, did not, open brackets, and could not, close brackets, manipulate the gravity nor be repeated to, quotation marks, get it to work, close quotation marks, full stop. Further, it is a circular reference akin to how aging rocks is achieved in geology. Ask an archaeologist how do they age a fossil, they excavate and they pass it to a geologist to age the rock. But then ask the geologist how they age the rock and they pass it back to the historian for the age of the fossil. A circular reference. Oh, Christ. None of that is true. None of it is true. The fact is that archaeologists and geologists have looked at a lot of rocks. And based on the rocks that are in the rock layers and what's above the rock layers and what's below the rock layers and the types of fossil in the rocks and the radiometric dating of the rocks. They know how old the bloody rocks are. God. Another example of an issue with the Copernican model teaching in the national curriculum is the claim that the Earth has a molten iron core. This is asserted the result of seismological predictions. Seismological, what are those, scotch? Seismology is claimed to be a science, but all it is sonic radar waves which they fire into the ground, and depending on what they reflect back is interpreted to be evidence to prove certain issues. The problem is, the deepest hole ever to be drilled into the Earth is the Kola super deep borehole, brackets just 8 miles deep, close brackets, in northwest Russia in the early 90s. Well, we don't trust what the Soviet Union were doing. Of course not. Probably dug by hand by prisoners in a gulag and political escapees and scotch. Seismology predictions predicted numerous things they should find when they drilled, but they were wrong on all counts. For example, they predicted that the density of the rock would increase with the depth, but this did not happen. The density decreased with depth. Ooh. They also predicted that there would be a transition layer of rock from granite to basalt at a certain depth, but there was not. Also predicted by seismology was expected evidence of water only down to a certain depth, but this also turned out to be incorrect. And even more bizarre was the emergence of boiling hydrogen mud. Hydrogen is the lightest element and was not thought to exist at all on Earth or below the surface. Hydrogen is too light! ! These are 4 good examples where seismology was wrong. There are more, but the point is the Earth's core is an issue because we are told that it has a molten iron core, but the Curie temperature of iron and nickel are both exceeded 10 times over. The Curie temperature is the point where a magnetic metal will lose its permanent magnetic properties. It fails to be a magnet anymore. Earth's core cannot hold a magnetic charge when you realize the Curie temperature is exceeded. The only way this is possible is if the Earth core, without a capital letter, receives an induced external electric charge. The electric universe proposers argue that the core must have an electric source external to the Earth, but whether this is true or not is not the point being highlighted here. The point is that the Curie temperature is met, and the Copernican/heliocentric model does not allow for an induced source. We are educated that the Earth creates its own charge by something called the dynamo theory, which basically states that molten magnetic liquid will create its own charge, and sodium is used to demonstrate this point. Sodium does generate its own charge, but there is no evidence for iron or nickel in molten form doing the same. Literally, there is no evidence that nickel or iron do this, yet it is taught as fact in school. If there is no evidence to support the molten iron core self-perpetuating its own charge, perhaps something else is going on. Whatever the position actually is, there are enough questions regarding the molten iron core for anybody to research the possibility it generates its own magnetic charge that allows our compasses to point to north the way we are told. Even if the molten iron core is actually true, the process of actually proving it to oneself is a journey in itself that should be promoted for the inquisitive journey it creates. God, scotch. Oh. The evidence to prove this molten iron core is so weak that no court would realistically accept that it is actually true, and national curriculum does teach this doctrine. The question is, why is the evidence so hard to find to prove this point? Well, it's not, is it? You just go to a fucking library. Keep calm, Professor Bluetits. Another example of an issue with the Copernican model is that night and day is caused by Earth rotation. No capital letter on Earth again. Has he no respect for the fourth planet? Mercury. For the third planet in the solar system. An easy concept to understand. As the Earth faces the sun, dawn breaks. As it leaves the sun, dusk and night follows. We all understand that. But of course the Earth is facing the sun all the time. It's the bit of Earth facing the sun, not the Earth facing the sun, unless he thinks it's a fucking flat. Stop swearing. Jesus Christ, more Scott. This sort of language, you would think I was drinking Stella or something. Like one of these chaps outside the window who keeps drawing penises on my car. It's difficult to get an 80s rolls repainted. Is it hot in here? Right, well, yes, whatever. As it leaves the sun, dusk and night follows. We all understand that. Clearly you don't, but let's carry on. However, there is again no science to prove that we are spinning. What utter nonsense. 15 degrees an hour is the rate, and this is measured and demonstrated with a simply gyroscope. A simply gyroscope? What's a simply gyroscope? There's more. Sorry. 15 degrees an hour is the rate, and this is measured and demonstrated with a simply gyroscope connected to a 24-hour clock mechanism, brackets, rather than the usual 12-hour clock mechanism found usually. Close brackets. This rotates at the same pace as the Earth spins on its axis. 15 degrees an hour. Thanks, Bob. However, the test showed the gyroscope accurately detected the detected degrees of movement. Right. However, the test showed the gyroscope accurately detected the detected degrees of movement. The problem is, if the Earth was actually rotating, the gyroscope should have actually showed the rotation of the Earth in addition to the rotation of the clock. So the net effect should be a 30 degrees rotation in 1 hour, not the stated 15 just from the clock. The only results evident were the clock was observed moving with the gyroscope. This strongly suggests that we are not spinning, and therefore the rising sun is not the consequence of an Earth rotating. I have never heard anything like this before in my life. Nothing. No. Never heard anything so ridiculous. Ever. And I went to Oxford. So what is the evidence to support that the Earth spins? The evidence is that the stars all rotate in concentric circles around our head. It is argued that there is another rotation point in the skies of the south. It's not argued, you can see a photo of it, you tosspot, proving that the Earth is turning, yet there is no evidence that the stars seen in one over the other are actually antipode. What? Antipode is the opposing place on a sphere, and if the southern stars are doing the same as the stars of the north, then 2 of the 3 southern continents would see the stars in the opposing antipode position to the ones from the north. The problem is twofold. You cannot see the stars from the north to be able to prove they are underneath your feet, brackets, as the Earth is in the way, close brackets, and that a compass has to be corrected for something called, quotation marks, magnetic declination, close quotation marks, to ascertain where, quotation marks, true south really is, close quotation marks. There is no evidence that the southern star rotation can be seen from an observer looking south in the south of America and an observer in the south of Australia at the same time on a sphere in winter. Well, I'm going to have to Google this, because I think what he's suggesting is that if someone in Argentina looks up at the sky in winter, and someone in Australia looks up at the sky in winter at the same time, they should both be able to see the stars. But I'm pretty sure. How's this Google work? Dear Google. Dear Google. What is the time difference between Argentina and, let's say, Sydney. Australia. If this is like a 12-hour time difference, oh, there we go. Right. Okay, so Australia is 13 hours ahead of, well, Sydney, Australia is 13 hours ahead of Buenos Aires, Argentina, so that means when it's 11 o'clock in the morning in fucking Argentina, it's midnight in Australia, so they wouldn't be able to see the stars. It's impossible. And you know why? Because the world's a globe. This is getting me angry. So I think he wants to prove the planet. You can prove the planet's not round because it's nighttime in Australia when it's daytime in Argentina. What a cleft! He actually submitted this to us in an effort to gain a qualification. Oh, I'm losing faith in the future of our country. Right. Okay, so the thing he says proves the world is a globe can't happen because it genuinely can't happen. So there we go. On a sphere in winter, the tilt of the Earth points the northern hemisphere towards the sun. But the southern hemisphere away from the sun, so two observers in each continent should be able to look in the opposing place to north and see the same rotating point and the stars all going around it. This evidence does not exist. Well, no, of course it doesn't. You moron. I wish Barbara was here. She would find this hilarious. Maybe I'll tap it out in Morse code on the window. I'm not going to open the window. She could crawl in. No, frankly, I think she's better off out there. She's learning a lesson about staying calm. Right. On a sphere in winter, the tilt of the Earth points the northern hemisphere towards the sun, but the southern hemisphere away from the sun. Well, in winter in the southern hemisphere, that would be, wouldn't it? Right. The evidence does not exist. No. You can see rotating stars, but you cannot prove, brackets to yourself, close brackets, that they are being seen in antipode for both observers at the same time. It's because it's light in one place and dark in the other, which means you can only see the stars from one of the fucking places. This evidence is huge, because without it, the fallback position is that the rotating stars are just rotation points in the sky like the blades of a Chinook helicopter. ... just circling points in the sky of stars, more akin to two vortices. The evidence is needed to prove sphericity, but it cannot be found. Instead, infrared causation is derived from pendulums that are claimed to sway back and forth, and as the sun turns underneath the pendulum, this shows the Earth is turning. Scotch. Oh, I'm so drunk that there is enough critical evidence against this inferred cause to reject it as credible because it is not directly measuring Earth turning, brackets, it is merely showing what a pendulum does, close brackets, and there are issues with verification and credibility of the claim of pendulums in the first place, as they are inconsistently behaving otherwise in accordance with any turning of the Earth below them. This sounds very much like the sort of thing someone would say if they hadn't actually paid any attention to what the experiment was in the first place. There is a claim that hurricanes behave differently in the north to the south, thus proving the Earth is turning. However, we can demonstrate how a vortex can exist next to another vortex with a paddle and a steel pool of water. This one, he's taken a still image from a video, so that's useful in a printed out thesis. This one was caused with a plate, but it shows how two rotation points can exist next to each other in the natural world. Real physics. It is conceptual that the stars are spinning vortexes in the same way this video shows how it might be done. This questioning of the evidence would not be necessary if the antipodal nature of the stars could be demonstrated, but because it cannot, it has been researched. This is literally the stupidest thing I've ever read, Scott. Oh, I'm actually drinking scotch out of a beer mug, and I'm fast approaching the bottom of the beer mug. A tankard, even. Oh, another interesting fact is that the moonlight is actually cooling. Oh, Jesus. If you measure the temperature in the shade of moonlight and then compare it to the exposure to moonlight, brackets, do it on a full moon for best result, close brackets, then you will see that it is significantly warmer in the shade. Well, of course it is, because it's in the... I didn't mean to belch, sorry. This is why, on a clear night, it is generally speaking colder than on a cloudy night. Why? Because the clouds prevent quite as much heat being radiated from the surface of the planet. On a clear night, the heat can just piss off into space. This is why in the desert, generally speaking, it's very hot during the day, bloody freezing at night. Look, I know I'm just a drunk law professor, but I do have a basic grasp of how the world actually bloody works. This scotch is giving me a bunged up nose. For whatever reason, this is not taught to children, but it is fun science with a serious point to make. It's not fun, it's not science, and it's not taught to children, because it's not true. Moonlight is not the reflection of sunlight, and if it is, there is no explanation by science as for why it has a negative value to it. It doesn't. How is it possible that it's warmer in the shade than it is in the moonlight? I've explained that. That is the sort of information that you pick up just by being alive. Whatever the cause for this, children are not told this, and the national curriculum only tells you that the moon is 250 miles away approximately. Another issue to consider is that we see too far. I would argue that Anthony may in fact be nearsighted, but that's just we're talking analogies and semantics there. The Earth's size, without an apostrophe or a capital letter, is a set 24,900 miles in circumference. This crystallizes the size to a set amount, and with some mathematical equations, a 6-foot observer at the beach can only see 3 miles according to the geometric rate that the land/sea falls away from you. It is geometric and not negotiable. Okay? Is the Earth's no apostrophe, no capital letter... Is the Earth's circumference is really 24,900 miles? Yes, you heard that correctly. As the national curriculum states, a simple beach observation can demonstrate that the horizon is far further than just a few miles. The basic formula for the drop of the land/sea is, for every mile, the Earth curves away, without a capital letter again, at the given rate of 8 inches per mile squared. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding. It's been a long time since I did graphs and maths. But if something is 8 inches per mile squared, wouldn't that make it not a circle? That would make it like an upside down U, like a parabola, wouldn't it? As a different graph, isn't it? As soon as you square something, it's like exponential. That's not going to meet in the middle. Anyway, I don't know. He might be right, he might be wrong. Who cares? He's wrong about everything else, so being right in one bit will make no difference. This means that 30 miles away, tall towers should be swallowed up by a wall of water, and that would show you the effects of the curvature of the Earth. Blackpool Tower stands at 518 feet tall and sits on the coast. Using the geometry, one can backwards calculate how far away you would need to be to see it swallowed up by the curvature of the Earth by using popular Earth curvature calculators. Okay, excellent. So he's not going to do his own maths. He's going to use an Earth curve calculator. This particular Earth curve calculator is used to test the Earth's curve. No capital letter, no apostrophe, for God's sake. And we can see that an object of 518 feet, brackets, in this case Blackpool Tower, close brackets, should not be seen at the 31st mile, but at the 30th mile we would only see the flagpole, but from 30 miles the flagpole is too thin and too small to be seen. It is just a flagpole. However, from 29 miles, the geometric curve dictates we should see the walk-around area that you pay to go up and see the scenery from. God, how can he make this such an unnecessary, complicated, fictitious thing? So, if you find a point that is about 29 miles from the tower, you can literally get a zoom camera and zoom into the tower to prove yourself that the Earth is in fact curved. Okay? You can predict the outcome. You should see the tower, but only the ball-shaped part at the top, ... but no more. The curve is geometric by default, so it is limited to a set amount. Oh, good, he's put in a still from a video, and looks like Blackpool Tower on a dark night. Lit up, but it's blurry, so it could be anything. Okay, according to this observer from Hoylake, Wirral, UK, at a distance of 29.25 miles, Blackpool Tower is seen, and because it is illuminated by the nighttime illuminations, it can clearly be seen, and you will see the light on the foot to the left is the love heart that sits just above its base that is on the promenade on the coast. Jesus. There's a level of detail that's needed, and then there is completely unnecessary detail that is totally meaningless to anything you're trying to explain. For God's sake, young Master Riley, will you please learn how to be concise and accurate? That's the two words I want you to take away from this peer review. I know they don't really work when it comes to law, either being concise, but accurate. The reason law and contracts are not short is because they're accurate. But you have somehow managed to make your thesis short and... Scotch. Although the point being made here is not whether or not the Earth is actually curving, the point is that there are people actively questioning the rate at that Earth curves. This is the type of repeatable, verifiable evidence that true science actually demands. By way of contrast, the given, quotation marks, science found with, for example, the molten iron core model is just a diagram/picture. Nothing empirical at all about the evidence. With this tower observation, though, it is real world, repeatable and verifiable. This is real science. Yes, of course it is. Whether or not this is accurate or not is not so much the point. What? This is real. I put this to anyone who has listened for this long and has remained sober. Here's his description of this observation. He says, this is real science. Whether or not this is accurate or not is not so much the point. The point of science is accuracy, you dick. Applying this observation to what is taught from the national curriculum, it just does not get challenged, and if it did, there should be a balanced presentation of opposing views by virtue of section 407 as discussed above in this document. At this point, you have just read 5 issues of interest within the science regarding the Copernican model as taught in the national curriculum. The point is to demonstrate with empirical evidence that there are real issues with what is taught as fact. Thinking back to the prohibition of political indoctrination, brackets found in section 406, close brackets, and the balancing requirements, brackets found in section 407, close brackets, it is apparent that there are opposing views that do need to be discussed within a school environment for the national curriculum to be compliant with the provisions discussed in this paper. There simply are not any opposing views presented by science. No discussion, no experiments of the real world, no disagreements to the points of heliocentricity. It is effectively suppressed by omission, and this is argued to foul the general prohibition of political indoctrination found in section 406. This makes it unlawful to indoctrinate children in receipt of state education with the Copernican model, because there is no presentation of any opposing views. It is simply missing from the national curriculum, and it cannot be so lawfully. If the Copernican model is taught, then either the opposing views should be presented fairly, or it should be prohibited under section 406, as it complies with the factors that resulted from the Dimmock case. There is no disclaimer in the national curriculum that states the Copernican model is not accepted by all, for no other reason than to alert the children it is not a given fact of life that the sun is, in fact, 93 million miles away. Poor lad really seems to have a problem with distances. Oh my god. I'm so drunk. If Blackpool Tower can clearly be seen from 29 miles away, brackets, but it should be basically swallowed up by the curve of the Earth, close brackets, then there is a topic to at least discuss there, applying the judge's words of quotation marks, proper tuition and discussion, close quotation marks, full stop. By way of fairness, the counter-argument is to the fact that Blackpool Tower is seen as, quotation marks, refraction, close quotation marks. It is argued that light will follow the curvature of Earth at a given rate. This rate of curved light is claimed to be the result of light bending through moisture in the air. Whether this is true or not is irrelevant for this paper. But it's not irrelevant, is it? It is simply the case that the student would then be able to make an informed decision to which he accepts. What about she? You saying little girls can't do science? You are nothing like a modern man. Probably the sort of chap who would pee in a bottle rather than going to the toilet because he's filthy. Either way... Oh no, sorry, missed a sentence. Does light follow a curved path in the atmosphere, or is the Earth, without a capital letter, just not curving at the rate it is claimed? Either way, this ability to critically challenge opposing evidence is far more important to children than just being spoon-fed figures, taught as fact, and not taught that they were not agreed on by all of science. Except they are. Conclusions from the perspective of law. Oh. Is he on conclusions already? He hasn't actually sort of stated his case in any kind of logical way. Never mind. Better for us, I suppose. Conclusions from the perspective of law. It is clear that there are numerous opposing arguments against the Copernican model. One college of proofs against the Copernican model argues, quotation marks, 200 proofs that the Earth is not a spinning ball, close quotation marks, and even if 199 of them are false, it only takes one to be right, and we don't live in a Copernican model after all. If you were to actually watch all 200 proofs against the idea that we are spinning, brackets at all, close brackets, orbiting anything spherical in shape and gravitationally attracted to the centre of mass as we are told, you would come out doubting everything you were taught unless you are so indoctrinated by Copernicism that you just dismiss it ignorantly. If a judge were to be presented with 200 proofs that the Earth, without a capital letter, was not actually a spinning ball, the, with a capital letter, judge would have to consider the merits of all 200 proofs and come to a conclusion. Aside from being time-consuming, it is difficult to dismiss so many without good reason to do so. There's a very good reason a judge would dismiss that. It's because it's a complete waste of buggering time. As said previously, the point of this paper is not to actually question the shape of the Earth and if it orbits the Sun or not. The point is to point out that the national curriculum does not alert children that the solar system, as taught currently, does not seem... The point is to point out that the national curriculum does not alert children that the solar system, as taught currently, does seem to be indoctrinating children with partisan politics without any balanced opposing views to the contrary even being discussed. There isn't, no apostrophe, isn't, in a, this is an academic, isn't, in an academic, a contraction, in an academic, I'm just, no, furious. Barbara? No, I'm not letting you in, Barbara. I just wanted to explain that I was furious. More scotch. Idiot woman. She somehow managed to clamber back up. But I don't know how to open the window. At least that's what I've told her. She always opens them. How am I supposed to know how they work? Ridiculous. Right, yes. We were reading a paper by the sort of chap that would put the word isn't into his academic paper. Not only bad enough that he put isn't in there, not even a capital letter. A capital letter, apostrophe. Now I've lost a page. Where was I? Okay, so here we go. There. Listen carefully, Anthony. There is not. Yes, that's the word. Is not isn't. Were you born in a barn? There is not even the disclaimer statement that the Dimmock deemed necessary to the what? There isn't even the disclaimer statement that Dimmock deemed necessary to the solar system. Children, for the past 30. What? What is this? Children, for the past 30, years, have all been taught a Copernican model that is demonstrably questionable, brackets, by the evidences of just this paper, close brackets, and the law requires this one-sided indoctrination to be prohibited if it indeed find it to be promoted and partisan. There is no mention of any opposing views. Whether we live in a Copernican model or a geocentric Aristotelian model, created by a greater intelligence or living in some kind of electric universe, these are the opposing views that need to be presented to children so they are not indoctrinated by education and to ensure that the law is complied with. Changes are needed to ensure the provisions of the Education Act are complied with. I believe this is exactly the same argument that those bloody creationists were using about 10 years ago when they decided to change creationism to intelligent design. And then they said, it's a scientific theory now because we've called it intelligent design. When it's just putting in the idea that you were poofed into existence by some sort of supreme being who designed you for the universe and the universe for you, and God. Back at paragraph 2 of this article, I thought it was a paper, but now it's an article, it was stated that we would return to the duty of the Secretary of State in terms of missing accountability. This is that time. Does it have to be? It has been shown how Section 406 and 407 catch headmasters, boards of governors, and local authorities, but let us now reconsider the duty of the Secretary of State for Education. The Right Honourable Gavin Williamson is the current Secretary of State. His main duty is found in Section 10. As discussed earlier, Section 10 is a very general, quotation marks, promote the education of the people, close quotation marks. Section 11 is basically the same. It appears that to be alerted to the issues against the current teachings of the Copernican model in the national curriculum and to do nothing about changing it, this could easily breach the Section 10 duty to promote education, because the word indoctrination could be argued to be the antithesis. If Gavin Williamson MP was found to be actually allowing the promotion and indoctrination of education, this would surely cost the taxpayer unnecessary legal costs. Failing to inform children of opposing views and allowing proper discussions to take place is a very simple alteration to the national curriculum that would remove any risk under the provisions of Section 406 and 407. Kenneth Baker introduced this national curriculum, and credit is given. His intentions at the time were clearly stated: to nationalize standards of education so children all receive the same key points in life. However, this issue of the one-sided Copernican indoctrination cannot surely be what was intended by Lord Baker back in 1988. A one-sided presentation of Copernican views is only acceptable if there are no opposing views. However, there are opposing views, and by virtue of that fact, the law dictates that pupils are presented a balanced presentation for the opposing views. At the moment, this simply does not happen. Thank God. The sun is 93 million miles away, and if you do not memorize that value, you will fail your exam if you do not recite it on demand. Didn't that sentence appear exactly that way earlier in this paper? He's plagiarizing himself. In law, it is respectfully submitted that all four named parties, brackets, Secretary of State for Education, local authorities, boards of governors, and head teachers, close brackets, all over the country are breaching Section 406 by failing to forbid the promotion of partisan political views because there are no opposing views or subsequent discussion following decision of the judge in scotch. Whether the sun is 93 million miles away or not is not the issue. I would argue it is the issue. Because if the sun is 93 million miles away, then this silly flat earth nonsense is clearly wrong and therefore doesn't belong anywhere near a science class. The issue is whether or not the way the Copernican model is taught within the national curriculum could be deemed as promoting political indoctrination, and if so, has this issue been alerted to the right people, and did those people make changes to allow for opposing views to be presented to children? That's a question. If not, the law is being broken, but the bigger issue is there has been 30 years since the national curriculum has been introduced, and that is a whole generation that has missed out on the reality of our world, perhaps not being Copernican after all. This could be argued to have zero real value, but can also trigger people into the realization they have been missed out on what? Into the realization they have missed out on something that they should have been told years ago, and had they actually been told, they would have had the ability to try and work out the nature of our world for themselves with systematic experimentation, as per the definition of science, brackets, found above, close brackets. Perhaps more interest on science would have resulted if the perception is that there might be more to our world and we can find out new and amazing discoveries. Well, I would argue Nathan? Who's Nathan? Anthony, sorry. That's what science does. It discovers new and amazing things. You just don't believe any of them. Ugh. Unfortunately, I've run out of the good scotch and I've had to go onto the Jack Daniels, and it's not pleasing my palate at all. By teaching a one-sided and dogmatic doctrine, 30 years of education may have been compromised and people might not have been told the truth. Again, it may be the case that the sun really is 93 million miles away, but rather than being indoctrinated with that figure, the legally compliant way that the law demands education to behave is to allow the presentation of opposing views if some issues that are opposing the official narrative are presented to the students. For the last 30 years, this has not happened, and it should not be the case that another 30 years passes. This is an exercise in how many times can you repeat yourself in one... How many times can you repeat yourself in how many times? Can you repeat yourself in one paragraph? For the benefit of science, education, the national curriculum generally, for teachers teaching it, Headmasters responsible for ensuring Section 406/7 is complied with, boards of governors everywhere, and each local authorities, yes, that's not me slurring, each local authorities, up and down the country, and of course the Secretary of State personally. This article should be considered to be raising the flag against the taught, fact, close quotation marks, of the Copernican doctrine in school, to now inform others that the Copernican model is simply not accepted as truth, and ipso facto, this then means that all parties must ensure that Section 407 and the duty to offer a balanced presentation of opposing views is triggered and complied with. The curriculum should encourage and allow for opportunities for learning away from educational constraints, rather than promote one-sided position that does have legitimate opposing views and evidences. The reason for Section 407 The reason for Section 407 is to allow that child to come to their own decision about what evidences they accept. No, you clot. Oh. Education is there to teach you how to evaluate evidence and research and find sources. Maybe this is the problem. Maybe this is something that wasn't taught whenever this imbecile was, taking year 8 for the 9th time. Education should encourage you to research and teach you how to spot sources that are trustworthy and sources that are not, and differentiate between them, which is all the more important these days when the internet it gives people the opportunity to disguise nonsense as fact, where blogs are being written to look like scientific papers when they're not. More Jack Daniels. Is this better than just being indoctrinated by one-sided, biased pseudoscience passed off as real science story based on a character, brackets, Copernicus, close brackets, that cannot even be verified to even exist, question mark. Remember, his views were based on another character, brackets, oh God, I'm too drunk for this, Aristophanes, close brackets, that it is doubtful if he even existed either. Ultimately, the question for a court to decide is whether or not the teachings of the Copernican model are actually indoctrination following the decision of Dimick, and for the reasons outlined above in this article. It is almost certain that the national curriculum teaching of the Copernican model is one-sided and promoted indoctrination, and the only way this would be lawful is to allow the presentation of opposing views to the contrary, and genuinely challenging the views of the Copernican model. This would trigger significant nationwide academic discussion and reignite interest in real science among scholars and practitioners of science. No, it fucking wouldn't. It would be an embarrassment to a civilization that has existed, for more than 1,000 years. Well, word count, 12,049. I think he reached that by repeating himself several times. There's more, where he talks about how difficult it is to research. Apparently it was extraordinarily difficult. Extremely difficult. He spent 4 years researching earth science, and he's been a member of an organization of independent scientific research, R-E-A-S-R-C-H, called Field Engineer Corps, whatever the hell that is. And with knowledge acquired from researching earth science, he already knew there were contradictions in what was taught in school compared to what science can demonstrate within scientific method. Why doesn't he say the scientific method, not just scientific method? It's almost like he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Who would have imagined? Well, I think we can all agree that young Master Riley wasted his time applying to this institution, but we are pleased to have taken his money We gave him several opportunities to change what he was writing about, but he insisted, and what he's produced makes as much sense as Barbara when she falls down the stairs. Scott. Unfortunately, the toll has not only been taken on my time and your time, but also on my liver. Yes, I fear I have unnecessarily subjected you to what I can only describe as torture for quite some time. I've never known anyone to talk so much without knowing the first thing about what they're talking about. Ever. Ever. And I'd like to pass an amendment to the admissions policy, if it is possible, on the application form. Can we please put a section in there with the biggest tick box you can possibly put on that says, do you believe in flat earth? And if they tick yes, it's got to be a big box just to make sure they can keep it within the lines. But if they tick yes, can we please just not let them in? I now conclude possibly the worst experience of my academic life. And I apologize to you all for wasting your time. But I did drink quite a lot of very lovely scotch. Until next time.